Thank you, Matt. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So why do we focus on colostrum? So probably some of you or most of you know neonatal animals in general, they're pretty susceptible to disease. And in dairy cattle, that's no exception. These animals are the most vulnerable to disease. This is probably the most vulnerable stage of disease of these animals across their entire lifespan. And this is pretty important because it has pretty significant effects on economic loss in these animals, and reported estimates at around 160 million overall in the US in terms of treatments, loss of growth of these animals, and some of the mortality. And especially now with the cost these animals have, both for rearing animals and beef and dairy, we're talking about beef and dairy last night on the conversation, we can simply not afford of either losing animals or having animals that don't grow to the rates that we expect them to. And then we end up with an animal that is of inferior quality maybe. So because of that, I'll just go there. Colostrum management is one of the most important aspects of preventing some of these diseases in the first place in these calves. And for a long time, there's been a lot of research done on this topic that focus on how much colostrum we have to feed, what's the quality of that colostrum, and then what's the effective passive transfer we need to give of immunoglobulins from colostrum to those animals. And then these immunoglobulins are going to effectively protect these animals over the first couple of months of life until their own immune system is able to tackle some of these pathogens on their own terms over time. But we have a lot of information on the role of colostrum in terms of IgG and passive protection, but actually colostrum is a lot more than just IgGs. Colostrum has a lot of components and growth factors in there, and immune cells, when you feed it fresh, that collectively contribute to the development of that animal when it's born. When it goes from the uterus, that is a sterile environment, to the external world, and is shaping how it develops, not only protecting through passive transfer for immunoglobulins, but collectively shaping how that immune system and some other physiological systems develop on that calf. So that's kind of like the overarching theme of some of our research in my lab. So this study in particular, we were really interested in seeing what's the role colostrum has overall programming the development of the immune system of these animals, just beyond just passive transfer of immunity. So what we did two things. We had a group of calves that we fed fresh colostrum and a group of calves that we didn't feed any colostrum, and we have a facility on campus that allows us to do that. And we fed either fresh or frozen colostrum to these calves to see if there's any difference in there. On farm, we have a lot of questions from farmers that if it's better to feed fresh or frozen. Frozen is a lot more logistically feasible for these animals. Farmers can plan accordingly and have good reservoirs of colostrum on their farm to feed adequate amount and good quality of colostrum. So that was an interesting question we received from farms all the time. And also from a physiological standpoint, we were really interesting to see what are like some of these more mechanistic effects colostrum has on development. So we use a vaccine model. We vaccinated cows so that we could have a specific traceable signal from mom into the calves, the ones that receive colostrum. And then we also vaccinated the calves with the same vaccine to see how they would respond between calves that don't receive colostrum, but also between fresh and frozen. So if we go to the data, this is passive transfer. This is what we would expect. Calves that don't receive any colostrum, they don't have any passive transfer. They're very vulnerable to disease on those first months of life. So this is data at 24 hours of age, yes. No difference between fresh and frozen. Then when we look at some of the data of the vaccination model, when we vaccinate the cows, those cows develop specific titers against that vaccine that we vaccinated against the antigen of that vaccine. Those antigens are effectively transferred into the colostrum. And then when we see in the calves we vaccinated in those calves at 3 different times. And we can see that the calves that are fed fresh or frozen, they have effective transfer of titers from mom into the calf, and it's going to protect them for the first couple of weeks. And then the calves that don't receive colostrum, they don't have those titers, and they start responding to the vaccines a little bit earlier. That's because colostrum effectively downregulates some of the responses on the calf and prevents early responses to prevent some unnecessary responses in early life. And that's kind of like some of the things that we see overall on the other results. I know most of you in the room are not immunologists, but kind of like the overall theme that we see on this study is that colostrum is downregulating unnecessary responses, especially inflammatory responses on these calves. They're downregulating activation of macrophages and neutrophils as well, and they're preventing unnecessary responses at that stage in a moment that they are protected by signals that are coming from mom, that are coming from the colostrum. So kind of like the way that we see this, and this is something that researchers on the human side have also observed, is that when an animal goes from the womb, the in utero environment that is sterile, to this external world that is filled with microbes everywhere, that immune system has to have a learning step of understanding when do they need to react, and when there is something that is just a normal commensal microbe that is present there and is not causing any harm. And then what we think is that in ruminants, colostrum is playing that role and is providing not only protection, but also important factors that kind of like tease how that immune system should function and work in that early period. And I love this image because it kind of like showcases that. This is a immunohistochemistry image. On one side, you can see the trillions of microbes that are in the gut, and there's just a small layer of mucosa, and then you have the immune system on the other side. So the immune system constantly has to be understanding when it needs to react and when it's just a normal commensal member. And then colostrum is both shaping the initial microbes that are going to be present there, and then how that immune system is going to react and respond. And I think for lack of time, and maybe leave some time for questions, I'm just going to leave it at that. But just in general conclusions, what we see in part of this research, some of this has been published already and provided data for a master's thesis on my lab, is that colostrum is a lot more than just immunoglobulins. And it provides a lot of growth factors. And now in our research, we're focusing on understanding, okay, when we process colostrum, either when we pasteurize or we spray dry colostrum, we were talking about that last night as well, how we're impacting some of these important factors. And we submitted a grant with Gusten Osterk, also a Huff-funded faculty, to continue working on this topic. And then what we also see in this research is that these factors are actively contributing to proper immune development in these animals. So hopefully they're programming to have a more resilient future as well. So with that, I'll thank the Dairy Innovation Hub, my lab, and some industry partners that also collaborate in this project. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent.